well, normally I'm the person who introduces the speaker, but tonight I get to introduce the introducer. And I don't know if any of you watched that silly award show on TV the other night, but one part I thought was very funny was when the MC was about to announce a presenter and said basically, and here is a woman who needs no introduction, and walked off the stage. And then Meryl Streep walked on. So I would like to say that I would like to introduce a person who practically needs no introduction into this room, a person who really has brought the field of astrology to the arena of academia, and for which we are very, very grateful for his great contributions there, and really floating astrology to an entirely different audience in a way that really shocked and surprised them. So, Rick Tarnas, if you would like to come up, and I'll have you introduce our speaker. So let's go from there.
I love the way, thank you very much, Lemia. I love the way Daniel Day-Lewis said before he and Meryl Streep had originally decided to do a straight swap, she was scheduled to play Lincoln and he was going to play Margaret Thatcher. It's my pleasure and honor to introduce our speaker tonight, Jessica Garfield Kabbara. Jessica, as many of you know from just reading the flyer, is a graduate student at Pacifica Graduate Institute master's program there in counseling psychology. She's graduated from the CIS bachelor's program. She's an honorary member of our philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness program at CIS, where I'm a professor. And she's also been a TA there in our program. We all know here, I imagine most of us anyway, have a sense how much, how true it is that when astrology comes into our lives, it does so not so much when we choose it, but when it chooses us. It's not something that, it's almost like a kind of grace when it comes in. It's got its own timing. And when that meeting happens, what we bring to our relationship with astrology will greatly shape what unfolds, even as astrology works its magic on us. And when Jessica began her relationship with astrology, well, for those of us watching that happen, it was kind of like watching a dolphin being introduced to water for the first time. She got it, and she got it fast, and she got it deeply and complexly. Perhaps it has something to do with her Sun, Mercury, Neptune triple conjunction, that super intuitive alignment. She kind of downloads the transmissions from wherever and then channels them to others. But to pick things up so quickly and so young, I suspect it's coming from something more probably karmic. You know, you see this a lot in music, for example, with the young Mozart, of course, or a Derek Trucks comes along and can play inspired slide guitar better than anybody else in the world, and he's still a young teenager. Jessica's probably been doing astrology before. She came into this life with something very special. But to her great credit, she's combining her natural gifts and this kind of prenatal capacity with a dedication to rigor, to her psychological education, to inner work on herself. Every astrologer needs this. And we're fortunate to have someone like Jessica who not only is willing to combine the two, but combines the two so passionately. Finally, a word on tonight's topic, which I think is one of the most important topics in astrology. At one level, a birth chart is a straightforward astronomical, mathematical portrait of the heavens. But it's not a straightforward blueprint of life instructions like a manual in computer engineering. It's a very complex, multidimensional work of art at the highest level. It's both a poem and a moral challenge for all of us. It's a kind of depth psychological portrait and a kind of existential epic in an esoteric code. And as astrologers, we owe it to ourselves, to our clients, to our family and friends, ultimately to the cosmos, to hold clearly and articulate that many-splendored, multivalent spectrum of meaning that is contained in every planetary configuration, so that we're not only informed, but we're able to live in some way more freely, more skillfully, more bravely than we would have otherwise. That's the astrologer's great responsibility and challenge. And that's a responsibility and challenge that Jessica has really embraced. So let's all welcome tonight Jessica Garfield Kabbara.
Thank you so much for welcoming me here tonight. I'm so excited and honored to have this opportunity, and I would like to thank the San Francisco Astrological Society for allowing me to have this opportunity to come share some ideas with you, and to Rick for a really heartfelt introduction that made me feel even more welcome here. So before I begin tonight, I just want to give a general outline of what I'm going to be sharing to keep me on track. First, I'm going to do a very brief intro about myself, just to take a couple minutes to give you a sense of how astrology and I came together, because it really lays the foundation for everything else that I'm going to be sharing. Then I'm going to take about 30 to 40 minutes to present some ideas and do my best to illustrate them with as many different metaphors as I can, so hopefully one of them hooks. And then I'm going to try something new tonight that I've never done before. And I'm going to take about 15 to 20 minutes and actually do an embodied practice of what it is that I'm presenting for the 30 to 40 minutes, which is I'm going to do a reading in front of all of you to help illuminate and illustrate what it is that I mean when I'm talking about these ideas. And then I want to save a good 30 minutes at the end for discussion. There's so much collective wisdom in this room. Many of you have been practicing astrology for a very long time, some of you longer than I've been born, and so I've been alive. So I really want to draw in all the voices in the room, and I also want to say that I absolutely love questions. I kind of get off on it in this really interesting way, so I welcome all of your questions. And one last thing I want to say is it's my Mars return tonight, among other things. And thank you. I've made it once again, and I have a lot of energy just surging through me. So it's going to take a little bit for it to regulate and find where it's supposed to go. So bear with me in the beginning. All right. So very briefly, how astrology and I came together. My youngest, most earliest memories are of the stars. I grew up in the countryside, and they were essentially my best friends. They could listen to my deepest wishes, and they could hear my deepest fears, and I found great solace in them. And I had a deep prayer my whole life to be able to find what it was that I was looking for. I didn't know what it was, but I knew that if I waited long enough and kept at it, it would eventually reveal itself to me. When I was 18, I went and did my undergrad in sociology. It was the closest thing I could get to what I thought I was looking for. And I went to sign up on my first day for an astrology class, and my advisor said, "No, you mean astronomy." And I said, no, I think I mean astrology. She said, no, you mean astronomy. And I said, oh, okay, sure. So I took 2 years of astronomy, took astrophysics, did math problems. I have no idea what any of them mean, but somehow I got a B in that class, beyond me. And it wasn't until I was 20 years old when I made a pilgrimage out to the desert in Nevada, to Black Rock City, to the Burning Man Festival, where my now partner, Chad Harris, my romantic and my astrological partner, we give joint astrology readings together and have been for the last 4 years, read my birth chart. And it was literally a 5-minute reading, and I have no idea what he said. But I do know that I felt that in that moment, my deepest prayer had been answered. And it felt like this awakening, this illumination. And it just brought me to this place of feeling, why do I know this? I've been here before. I know this. I know this. I was so radically blown open in a way that I decided to drop out of college, get a divorce. I was married at the time, sold all my belongings, and moved out to San Francisco to study astrology with Rick Tarnas at the California Institute of Integral Studies, where I ended up getting my bachelor's. And I, through a bunch of synchronicities, started doing readings pretty quickly with Chad. And I got to a point in my practice where I felt like I had to stop. And I think a lot of us come to that point at one time or another for different periods of time. But I came to that because I felt that ethically I could not continue giving readings without having a deeper psychological understanding of not only myself, but the material that was being brought in by the clients. It was continuing to get increasingly more deep, more complex, and I wanted to understand how postnatal biography and woundings and traumas are showing up in people's stories, also their family of origin and their family system and how that plays into their experience of the natal chart. So I decided to go to Pacifica, like Rick mentioned, and I'll be graduating this, hopefully in a year from now if I finish my thesis on time. And my deepest passion right now is synthesizing archetypal astrology and depth psychology. So that's kind of what brings me to this moment. And I want to start with a poem by Rumi, actually, that I feel really captures the essence of everything I want to say tonight. It's called The Guest House, and it's translated by Coleman Barks. A joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. So in exploring the astrological spectrum of both light and shadow of planetary combinations, I'm going to be going into actual combinations, but before I do that, I want to just set up a little bit of the ideas that are informing how it is that I go about interpreting different planetary combinations. My main point is just that nothing in our lives happens superfluously. Every aspect, every relationship, every emotion, every thought, every dream has deep meaning, intelligence, purpose. Everything is interconnected and is serving everything else. So to make sure that we're all on the same ship before we set sail, there's just a couple of words that I will be using frequently tonight that I just want to make sure that we all have a general sense of what they are. I'm sure many of you have heard them before, but just to cover our bases. Archetypal astrology has shown me more than anything else that the archetypes, or the great gods and goddesses of the archetypal pantheon, are our great teachers. That by understanding their nature and the way that they are in relationship to one another, I can understand my own nature and the nature of the cosmos and my relationship to that. Through my lifelong journey of seeking to know myself and the universe by contemplating the implications of astrology being real, I am forced to reevaluate the way in which I approach all my relationships and the modes and style of interpretation in which I do that. So what I mean by that is that if we really take in that astrology is valid, that our psyches and our souls are mirrored in the positions of the planets at the moment of our birth, and that our creative, unique potential continues to unfold through time from our transits, right? Because we're these meaningful centers of the cosmos in this lifelong dance of unfolding who we are through our transits, that if I really take that in, it has to run through every fiber of my being, just as it runs through every thread of the cosmos, that level of intelligence and creativity and awesomeness that has been in the making way before the human beings ever entered the scene. Way before we ever came along, this was all already orchestrated and underway. To bring that level of interpretation when we are looking at somebody else's chart, when we're holding their soul essentially in the palm of our hands, as it seems at times. But it's messy being human. It's really painful, actually. It can be. And to have the entire archetypal pantheon living inside of us, these primordial beings, these energies that predate time, and these primordial relationships that Saturn and Uranus have with each other, or Mars and Venus, they go so far back, and yet I'm expected to live with them inside of me my whole life. And not only are they living inside of me, but I'm living inside of them in this deeply symbiotic, mutual, recursive relationship. And that's where the depth of the participation comes in, and our freedom, our free will to be able to explore and express this whole spectrum of potential. And so that's where we come and we understand, as Rick mentioned, that archetypes, when we're understanding the nature of them, that they're multidimensional. There's all these different dimensions in which they can come through, and often simultaneously are. Right? We're aware of how they come through on the physical plane, on the emotional plane, on the psychic plane, the spiritual plane. There's all these different dimensions, and they're coming through all of them all the time. And simultaneously, while that's happening, their nature is also that they're multivalent, that there's this wide range of possible expression of potential that they come through that's still coherent and stays true to the archetype in of itself, but it's radically pluralistic and radically open. And so that's where we get this paradoxical nature of being human, right? That these polarities are existing inside of each archetype, inside of each sign, inside of each house, and then it's on this axis, and this axis represents a polarity of Sun and Moon, Mars and Venus, Aries and Libra, the first house and the seventh house, right? These are polarities, but it's an axis, it's a spectrum. There's not actually Leo over here and Aquarius over here as if they're separate. They're in this relationship, and one can only exist because the other one exists, like all relationships. And so this is where this idea of multivalence in the spectrum comes in, but it's very paradoxical because these two simultaneously, seemingly opposing contradictions or ideas they're existing at the same time. This truth and this truth, which seem like they're contradicting each other, are both true. And this implies a deep unity, a wholeness of psyche. And this is what I want to talk about tonight, is how do we hold the paradox, the contradictions inside of our soul, inside of the birth charts, when we're talking with friends, when we're talking with clients, to fully embrace who they are and more of the totality of their being, and the complexity of their soul, and the complexity of their chart. So, The last kind of idea or term I want to bring in before I go into examples is this idea of pharmakon. Pharmakon is a Greek word, and it's where we get our word pharmacology from. And pharmakon really captures this idea of paradox because it is both the medicine and the poison. It's both the elixir, the thing that can heal us, and the wound. It's very chironic in that sense. The wounded healer. How is it that it's both the wound and the healing? How is it both that it's poisonous and it's medicinal? So pharmakon is paradoxical and ambiguous, and it's a symbol of opposition manifest in the understanding of our complex world. It literally means sacrament. And so I think that each planet and each planetary combination, or each sign placement or house placement, is imbued with this idea of pharmakon, that nothing in of itself is inherently bad or good, right or wrong, but it's our relationship to it that channels which way that it goes. It's really easy to think of it with substances like marijuana or alcohol or ayahuasca or psilocybin mushrooms. We take these things and we ingest them into our bodies, and they could be the most powerful healing experiences that we ever have, or they could be very wounding, and we could fall away into addiction and lose ourselves. But the substance in of itself isn't good or bad, but our relationship to it, that's the pharmakon. So I'm saying that we can have a chironic or pharmakon approach to every planet and planetary combination. And that's how we really are able to honor the complexities of one's birth chart, of one's soul, and then ultimately encourages them to live a deeper, more participatory, rich life, where there's actually more energy, more libido for the person to work with and co-create and manifest who they want to be. Yeah. So before I get into Pluto, which is one of the easiest archetypes to be able to see this idea of pharmakon with, I just want to bring out one quote that Rick actually wrote in Cosmos and Psyche. And he says, "One is reminded here of Niels Bohr's axiom of quantum physics, quote, the opposite of a profound truth, may be another profound truth." Or Oscar Wilde's, "A truth in art is that whose contradictory is also true." What is difficult, of course, is to see both images, both truths simultaneously, to suppress nothing, to remain open to the paradox, to maintain the tension of opposites. Wisdom, like compassion, often seems to require of us that we hold multiple realities in our consciousness at once. So let's dive into Pluto and apply this idea of pharmakon and chiron, whatever the medicine or whatever the metaphor, the language is that you want to enter into that. So how do we hold the light and the shadow? And then get into the complexities of what do we actually mean when we say light and shadow? What is the shadow? What is the light? How do we know which is which? So I'll get into that right after we kind of open up the morphic field of Pluto. So as we all know, Pluto is the principle of evolution and transformation through the death rebirth process, through one of the most paradoxical things of our existence, death and rebirth, two different sides of the same coin. That through destruction and elimination, we make room for creation, or the shamanic descent into the underworld is what actually allows us to be renewed and reborn. We know that Pluto deepens and intensifies and empowers whatever it touches, often to overwhelming extremes, sometimes catastrophic. But it compels and it empowers because it's that elemental, titanic power. It's the volcano that erupts, and it's chthonic. It's the purifying fire of catharsis in the phoenix rising from the ashes, that we actually have to sit in the fire and be burned in order to be renewed, that we have to go down in order to go up. Energy. It's our instincts, it's the Freudian id or libido, It can be aggressive, it can be murderous hatred, it can be jealousy and envy and all of those emotions we so do not want to identify with because it makes us not seem noble. It makes us seem not evolved when I feel jealous of you, or I feel inferior to you, or I feel inadequate to you. It really is one of the most vulnerable parts of the psyche, all of that which is in the unconscious, simply meaning we're not conscious or aware of it, because we often don't want to shine a light on it. It's the forbidden, it's the taboo, it's those boundaries you are absolutely not supposed to cross, but somehow you find yourself doing it anyways at some point on your journey. It's the deep, dark, mysterious reality that's underlying all things. And it's the driving force of evolution and biology. So when we look at a chart and we see where Pluto is, we tend to think that this is really a concentrated, potent place that this person is specifically seeking to evolve and transform this lifetime through some destruction of an old way of being in order to make room for this new way of being. Yet the paradox of it is that the very energy which is destroying and making room for the new, and the very thing in which it is destroying, is all tied up into one thing. So it represents not only the subject or the object of transformation, but it's the mode through which it happens, and it's also the result of what happens once you go through that transformation. And that's where we get the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail. I think Arroyo really captures this perfectly with Pluto in Astrology, Karma, and Transformation when he says that one of the paradoxical aspects of Pluto's nature is that its symbolism incorporates both the old life forms, which are ready to be eliminated, and the very power that will shatter those forms and affect this type of psychological emotional surgery. This seeming paradox may be understood when we see that the Pluto energy is contained within the old forms and that it simply needs to be activated for the energy to release, and thus brings things to the surface rapidly and compellingly. An analogy would be the sprouting of a seed. For the rigid, concentrated form of the seed is indeed destroyed when the latent seed power begins to stir. As the seed receives the moisture and warmth it needs for the potential energy to unfold, the seed's form is split asunder and indeed is used for food. The actual splitting is what feeds it in order to nourish and sustain the new growth. We might take a lesson from this analogy in that while old life patterns and forms are destroyed and eliminated from one's present mode of living, during a Plutonian period, the energy released from its transformation, even in the form of pain and deep agony, is the very energy which will nourish us, enable us to push onward towards new growth. And so that right there, Pluto in itself is the archetype of paradox. And we can see this really clearly when we look at the emotion of rage. If we apply pharmacon to rage, we see that rage in of itself is not necessarily poisonous or destructive. It actually can be the exact energy that we need to instigate change, to birth something new into the world, to overcome oppression. We see this in all of the revolutions that are sweeping across the world right now. 1 billion rising, women standing up against the violence and the oppression and the abuse towards them, or the revolutions that have been happening in the Middle East. You know, there's a fire in that. There has to be. There's a rage. What else is going to propel us to actually make a change happen? As depth psycho pattern, and then we're going to bring the two together and marry them. So before I go into Saturn, I just want to comment on what I mean when I say shadow. I think it's a term most of us have heard and probably use a lot. So what is the shadow? There's usually a negative connotation that's associated with it, but the shadow, if we apply the pharmacon to it, or we apply chiron to it, which we can do to everything that exists, all phenomena in life, that it is not inherently negative or bad. It's simply the disavowed, the unowned, the unwanted, the rejected, suppressed, repressed aspects of our psyche that we essentially want nothing to do with because it terrifies the shit out of us, right? To be vulnerable, to be weak, or some people, it's actually their creativity right? Actually stepping into who they're supposed to be as an artist or as a poet or as a dancer scares them so much that they keep it in their shadow and they don't identify with it, and they just say, I'm nobody, I can't do anything. Let those people do it. And that's kind of what we call the golden shadow. It's the parts that maybe you would want to be more identified with, but you can't because it's threatening somehow. But all of us have the other emotions for sure. Like I mentioned before, the jealousy, the envy, the inferiority. So, as Carl Jung recognized, the shadow has a regenerative energy in it, that some of our greatest gifts and potential are actually in our shadow. And the reason why I'm talking about this is because if we really recognize that the shadow is this regenerative vital force that is not innately or inherently bad, then when our clients come in and they're bringing in their suffering, their pain, their losses, their shame, their guilt, whatever it is that's essentially probably bringing them to come see you because they want help. And that's when most people come, right? When they're like, help me, my hands are tied and I just don't want to be like this anymore. What can I do? They're probably bringing in those aspects of themselves, and maybe they're hiding from themselves and hiding from you. But hopefully you can establish a container of safety, and that allows them to start bringing out the shadow parts of them. So how do we honor and hold and embrace people's shadows in a reading while talking about their archetypal complexes in the planets in a way that empowers them, in a way that makes them inspired and excited to live life again, that makes them want to leave that room with you and go actualize themselves in the world? How do we do that? I think we first have to really honor that there's an intelligence in the shadow, that there's an intelligence in every aspect of our being, that it's there for a reason, that there's a purpose to it, and there's a message in it, and it's probably trying to tell us what that message is if we listen closely. So let's go into Saturn. We all know that Saturn is associated with limit, with boundaries, with finitude, with the ending of things, with mortality and death. Substance to things and make it real, to actually give form to our ideals and our visions, to bring the ethereal into the material as creative beings, to actually manifest our dreams in a way that can be of service to others, creating structures and systems in our life that are enduring. And it takes a real level of commitment and devotion to be able to do that. Because Saturn, as we know, is Father Time, Chronos. Its gifts come with time. Its gifts come with devotion. Its gifts come with commitment, especially when nobody's looking and you still show up to do that thing and no one's ever going to see it. But Saturn sees it. Saturn feels it. And Saturn loves it so much when we honor him because he gets the baddest rap and we live in his world. We live in Saturn's world of time and space and materiality, of death and suffering and pain. It's got to be really hard to be Saturn. Most people aren't going, oh, hail Saturn, thank you so much for, my back really hurts today. Thank you for that. Ouch. Yeah. So there's the paradox. How can Saturn both negate, say no, restrict, and at the same time incarnate and manifest and bring things into form? It seems that by negating, by putting obstacles in our life, by narrowing our vision or narrowing our potential, when it says, no, you can't do that, no, you can't do that, but I want to, no. Okay, that it's by that very thing, the negating and the narrowing, the rejecting, that it's actually sculpting us and allowing us to be solid and manifest and express and actually give birth to things. So if Saturn helps us manifest by the negation and by the obstacles, how can we begin to actually approach those obstacles and when we're negated in a way that treats them as thresholds of initiation into a new realm of potential instead of running in the other direction because it hurts when you touch it? How do we come to the door and through commitment and endurance ask if you can continuously enter until Saturn says, okay, as guardian of the threshold, I will actually now let you in to a whole new world of possibility. Or the fact that it's both suffering and agony and pain and loss, which we experience from the first moment we enter this world, and there's a deep grief present. But at the same time, it's wisdom and maturation. And the paradox that it's through the suffering and through the loss that we actually gain this embodied knowing that becomes part of our DNA and becomes cellular, becomes part of the fabric of who we are, that we get to take with us through every next threshold we cross, even when we cross the threshold of death. From this side, when we're dying, whatever else it is that we're being reborn into, we get to take that wisdom through that suffering and through those trials with us and bring it into the next life and the next life and the next life. And that it heals through time, it heals through patience. So it seems like the antidote to the kind of limit and no principle of Saturn is the commitment and the devotion and the focus, and really honoring that death helps us keep our life in priority, how we spend our time, what we do with space. With and through our problems, our karma, our deep sense of duty and obligation to something much, much larger than ourselves. Maybe that's been passed down ancestrally through our lineage and our family. Maybe it's historical. Maybe it's contextual in the present time, politically, socially, economically. That burden, that weight that we all carry, it can either crush us or it can strengthen us and make us stand and be the anchor in the storm. So nothing in that spectrum of that multivalence of Saturn, of it both being negation and manifestation, is inherently bad or wrong. Just because you suffer doesn't mean you've sinned. It means you're human and you're living this life, along with all of us who are suffering. But it's the way we approach that suffering that gives us our nobility or our ignobility. And I think that you can see this in every sign, every house. It's holographic. It unfolds on itself. The meaning's interconnected and it serves every other part. It's an inextricable whole, which is where deep knowing and wisdom comes from, which allows for maturation and more capacity to manifest and incarnate. As Leonard says, the devil, after all, is a fallen angel, a high being whose possibility has somehow gone wrong through a distorted attitude. One more quote, and then we'll bring these two gods and goddesses together. Archetypal psychologist Thomas More wrote in his book, Care of the Soul, love of the soul asks for some appreciation for its complexity. Often, care of the soul means not taking sides when there is a conflict at a deep level. It may be necessary to stretch the heart wide enough to embrace contradiction and paradox. And that it is the driving force of evolution. And it's our dance with embracing this paradox that forges who we are and our character and our soul as human beings. For a couple reasons. One, as we see, both of them in and of themselves really lend themselves to the paradoxical exploration. As I'm sure most of you know, Saturn and Pluto, I wanted to bring in a little sign emphasis, even though that's not my personal path so far, has been through the planetary combinations, through the geometrical or angular relationships. But Saturn is in Scorpio right now, whose ruling planet is Pluto. And Pluto is in Capricorn, whose ruling planet is Saturn. And they're in an exact sextile to each other, a 60-degree angle. They're both at 11 degrees of their respective signs. And they both really lend themselves to this idea of shadow and our confrontation with it and how we live with shadow, both in and of ourselves and in the collective. So when we're thinking about any planetary combination, we remember that it's a symbiotic relationship and that it's a mutual inflection of the other. So first we're going to take Pluto, and the arrow is going to be pointing at Saturn, and then we'll reverse it. So as I briefly went into Pluto, there's no way to do justice to any of these archetypes in this amount of time, or in our entire lives, actually, which is the blessing and the curse of being human. So Pluto deepens and intensifies and empowers whatever it touches in service of transformation and evolution through the death rebirth process, through destruction in order to make room for creation. So all of the above Saturn qualities that I just mentioned, only to name a few, are all being empowered by Pluto. I think one really powerful way that you can see this come through in a person's natal chart who has Saturn, Pluto, or when we all go through our transits of Saturn to Pluto or Pluto to Saturn, or Saturn and Scorpio and Pluto and Capricorn, is this real sense and need and drive for inner authority. As Saturn relates to authority, it's what allows us to be the author of our own lives. That's where our ability to co-create and manifest comes from. By standing in our authority and having a certain level of mastery through self-awareness of who we are and how we operate and where we come from, that there's this real determined, focused quality that happens when Pluto touches Saturn. And often a person goes through a crucible or a crucifixion in order to be able to actually step into their own authority and to step into their own power, which is what Pluto is asking of us. How do we step into our own power? And often, to be able to do that, part of the shadow side of Pluto, right, which is there's intelligence in it, it's serving something here. So what could this be serving? Pluto relates to power struggles, manipulation, coercion, possessiveness. So why do we get into power struggles if Pluto's asking us to step into our power? Because often we have to give our power away in order to be able to get it back. Or we have to be so rigidly identified with this idea of power, and we're so inflated with it, that we use it over people and try to manipulate them, because actually the opposite is true. We actually feel very powerless, right? It's a compensatory effect. When I try to dominate you, it's because I feel so weak and dominated that it's the only thing I know how to do. But we have to go through this dance, this shadow dance, in order to realign and recenter and go, oh, there are Saturnian consequences for my actions when I assert my Plutonic power over other people in a way that isn't coming from my heart or their best good or my best good on a higher sense of what my best good is. And I get into these power struggles. And it can be really, 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 really intense and volcanic and disruptive and destructive. And it actually alienates me as a person. And I actually don't get real contact with other human beings or the cosmos. That's the shadow side of Saturn-Pluto, a real sense of alienation, isolation, and being cut off from true connection, true intimacy. But it can actually be that thing which empowers us to step into our truth and to have healthy boundaries so that we can show up in the world and actualize who we are and our creative potential. Healthy boundaries with ourselves, healthy boundaries with other people. Saturn relates to the superego, right? That moral conscience or judge who's, can be very harsh and even punitive at times, right? The taskmaster. But when channeled effectively, let's say into a project, writing a book, starting an organization, becoming a teacher, becoming an artist, when channeled, it can actually be that very thing which actually allows us to give birth to something. The Saturn-Pluto energy is the birth, pains, and labor that's really, and it's often in an excruciating way, through a pressure cooker kind of energy, trying to birth something into the world. But often there's a lot of loss that happens in that process because birth is intimately interwoven with death. So anytime something is being born and we're giving birth to something, something else is dying. Well, there's a lot of grief in that, and often a lot of shame in that. Shame is a really common emotion to be having with Pluto transits or Pluto aspects. Very shamed that you have these qualities about yourself, the shadow, and you'll do anything, almost anything at any cost to not show it to the world. When really, the pharmacon in that is to actually show it to the world, to do the counterintuitive thing and to be vulnerable and say, hey, these are my weaknesses and this is what I'm struggling with. Can you support me through that? Can you still love me even though I'm not perfect? Saturn Pluto can have a real orientation towards perfection. That's that kind of obsessive, compulsive, neurotic tendency it can have. It just wants to get things right. And if it does, then you'll be good enough and worthy enough to have the love, to be accepted, to belong, or whatever it is that's driving you to have those qualities. And there's nothing wrong with being obsessive compulsive. We all are in our own way. Nothing inherently bad about that. Can we find an object of desire and of love where it willingly wants to be a recipient of that obsessive compulsive energy, right? Is there something that would actually want the love that is behind that obsessive compulsive quality and openly receive it and say, I take everything you bring with this, your determination, your unbending will, that power to fight and to show up in just the right way and do it just right at any cost. A lot of things in this world that would love to receive that energy, as long as the other things aren't coming along with it, being acted out with that towards that person. The harsh criticism, the judgment, the punitive, you aren't good enough, because actually I'm projecting onto you because I actually feel like I'm not good enough. But I don't know how to own that, so I'm just gonna point my finger at you and say, you didn't do that right. You're not good enough. Nobody wants to be the recipient of that energy. But someone would like to be the recipient of that detailed precision and the amount of love and energy and care that's going into whatever it is you're birthing in that moment, that potentially could be laying the foundation, Saturn, which is very enduring, Saturn, these structures and systems that are built that can ultimately be amazing, amazing places for transformation and evolution to happen in a way that is lasting. That's the gift of Saturn Pluto. Okay, so we're at time for when I said I would demonstrate a reading. I'm gonna just check what's happening right now. I really wanted to do it with other combinations and have someone yell one out. Oh, just for fun, I'll just do 2 minutes. Okay, so yeah, just for fun. We'll see if it works. Somebody that you're curious about one combination, just kind of say it out loud, and then I'll just riff on it for 2 minutes, nowhere doing anywhere justice to us. Just to give another example of how we can see the intelligence that's in the shadow, that's in the challenges, and how those challenges might actually be serving a higher expression of the energy in that combination. Does that make sense? Okay. How we do it?
How about Uranus Pluto, since that's another big configuration we're living through?
Great. Yeah, I almost started to do that one. I was like, wow. Okay. So Uranus and Pluto are square 90 degrees to each other in the sky right now, and they will be through the end of the decade. And as most of us know, we're in the heart of it right now. It became exact last year in 2012, and will stay really tight through 2015, 2016. And then that, that archetypal waveform that comes in, started coming in 2007, started coming into an orb, which for outer planet alignments for world transits, we use 15 degrees. And then it comes in, and it gets tight, and it crescendos, and we're in the crescendo right now. And then it'll come back out and go out the other side by 2020. So Uranus and Pluto is a really interesting one. Let's take Uranus to Pluto, because I did Pluto to Saturn. So Uranus as the principle of liberation, freedom, change, breakthrough, radical, unexpected openings and surprises into new realities and new horizons. It's that innovative kind of brilliance or genius that essentially opens up worlds that maybe we couldn't see before, or at least we hadn't been paying a lot of attention to. Well, when it's doing this to Pluto, it gets really interesting, as we all, I'm sure, are feeling in our personal lives and on a collective level, because it's bringing that radical, revolutionary change, and often a kind of trickster quality. And the trickster just loves paradox and playing with boundaries and crossing boundaries and shape-shifting. I mean, the trickster is very paradoxical. And it does that to the Platonic realm of the underworld. And so we get this time period where all that's been repressed and put into the shadow of the Platonic dimension is getting radically opened up. And it's just like this, I get this image of this volcano whose like lid has been on, and the trickster comes in and like kind of like no one's looking and just like slips it off, and then the volcano starts erupting, and we're like, wow, that's really beautiful. Oh, holy shit, that's destroying everything around it. Oh wait, but I think new life is growing over there, very far away. I think it's coming this direction. Nope, more lava. So Uranus breaks open in these really unexpected trickstery ways the Plutonic dimension of the underworld, of all that's been repressed, the taboo, the hidden, the dark, the mysterious, all that shit. We'd rather flush down the toilet, you know, the things we don't want to look at. And it's doing that. And Pluto relates to sex, death, and rebirth. And so it awakens sexuality, it awakens the libido. Well, when you live in a really emotionally young culture like we do, a culture that barely can identify the emotions that it's having, let alone begin to engage in those interpersonally without feeling a tremendous amount of shame about the fact that I kind of don't like you, or, you know, you're not really my favorite person, or wow, I feel really, 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 really tiny in front of you, or I just straight up hate you, you know? I mean, not all the time, just when you do that thing. I mean, you know, we're a very emotionally young culture, and Uranus is asking us to waken up to that? Whoa, like that is some electric libidinal energy. And it can be really beautiful on one hand because it's super creative. I mean, what's happening technologically? I am not a worldly person. I let Chad do that for me because I'm just Sun, Mercury, Neptune, just kind of sweeps me away. But the things that he tells me that is happening, and I see it too, like I mentioned, the 1 billion rising. I mean, that's a revolution to see these women in China in uniform and an all-girls college standing row by row by row, as far as the eye can see, holding up a finger, saying we stand with the rest of the women in the world against the Plutonic sexual violence that has been put upon women for thousands of years. That is revolutionary. That is the trickster coming in and saying, surprise, like we're not keeping that down there anymore. It's time to take a look at this. And then we're going to take a look at it. The universe says we're going to take a look at it. And then we say, okay, well, how do we want to creatively engage with this as one end of the relationship, as a co-creative partner who's participating in this dance that I don't have full control over? Okay, this is happening. What do I want to do with this? Do I want to join the movement? Do I want to start an art project? Do I want to start an organization? Do I want to go be of service and actually help those women who are homeless because they were just beaten by their partner? You know, that's one really strong way that it's coming through. Just the things in which we've been unconscious of are just whoosh, coming up. I mean, personally, I don't know how your guys' home life is doing, but man, all the things that I did not want to take a look at is really being put in my face right now. So that's one way.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Did I see it?
The Gemini, Jupiter, great all these Pisces.
Oh, you want me to do another?
I don't know how to parse it.
Yeah. Okay. So I definitely want to do the reading just to show the demonstration of it. So I'll just say a couple things. So I'm not so much, like I said, sign based, but what I can say is that Jupiter is squaring Neptune in the sky and has been. So that's what we'll get close to the Pisces by talking about the Jupiter square Neptune, if that's all right with you. I'll let other people who are experts at that talk about that. So Jupiter's principle is to expand and magnify, to uplift and elevate whatever it touches. And so it's really doing that with the Neptunian dimension of our dreams and our imagination. The stream and flow of consciousness, our access to the Neptunian archetypal dimension of reality, which is the source of all image and creativity. So Jupiter's really blessing that with its good fortune and its sense of expansion. And it's also doing that with the shadow side of Neptune. Right? We all know that wanting to commune with the divine so much and quite possibly having a lot of pain around it and not quite knowing how to do it, and so we go for the drink. Too much. How do we know it's too much? How do we know it's poisonous and not medicine? What part of the pharmacon is it? I think it helps to understand maturity. What's maturity? Maturity is the ability to flow from one state of consciousness to another without getting overly stuck or fixated on one part of it. And we all get stuck or fixated at different points. It's how we swim in that moment and, embody it deeply and really get to know the terrain by being in it and looking around for a really long time and going, okay, I think I know this place. That's immaturity when we get overly stuck or fixated. And that's kind of what's happening when we fall into the shadow sides of Neptune with the addictions, the drugs, the drinking, the TV, whatever it does to help us escape, right? Because Neptune's paradoxical. It's that principle which escapes, but it's also that which brings us a deeper sense of enchantment and meaning to our lives. So Jupiter's really expanding all of that right now, really magnifying it. So I'd be curious how it's showing up in your lives. Are you noticing a stronger propensity toward commune with the divine through nature or relationships or sacred medicine journeys or holotropic breath work or, meditation? And is all of that serving the Saturnian world you live in? Is it serving your life? Is it serving your relationships? Is it serving your career? Are you becoming a more embodied person? Are you forming a conjunctio between your soul and the birth chart? Are you diving as deeply in the conjunctio, the sacred marriage, the sacred union? Are you diving more deeply into the birth chart to step into your potential through these things which bring you closer to the divine? Or are you leaving this world and going into some other world and forgetting about all of the Saturnian responsibilities and obligations that we have as human beings? We make a commitment to this body the moment we incarnate. We make a commitment to our relationships, to our family. We make a commitment to everything we say yes to because we're saying no to a lot every time we say yes. We're saying no to an infinite potential, and so when we're saying yes, there's a lot that's tied up in that. So I guess that's one way that I would look at some of the pharmacon with it, and that even in the addiction, it's not pathological. There's nothing wrong. You're not a bad person if you're an addict. No. You're just going for the same thing that all of us are. Deep communion, feeling one. Right? Neptune wants to feel one. It wants to feel connected and interconnected. It wants unity and wholeness, like we all do. That what you are escaping to, there's a message in it. There's an intelligence in it. There's a reason why you're doing it. It's not superfluous. Okay. If it's all right, well, yeah. I'm going to just do a mini demonstration. I have no idea how this is going to work out. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't, and then I'll know. So thank you for participating with me in that. So what I'm going to do right now is invite up the person who volunteered to be very vulnerable and courageous and share what's going on in her life right now to see if we can, by looking at her birth chart, get a sense of how we would apply some of these ideas of the chironic or pharmacon approach. Oh, blue button. So this is Delia Shargell. Please welcome her. Yay, Delia! Get my hair. So Delia volunteered I have no idea what she's going to talk about. I haven't prompted her in any way. It's like a regular reading. where you're in contact with the person beforehand and they maybe give you some questions or some things they want to know about. I have no idea what she's going to talk about, and we're just going to take 10 or 15 minutes and put up her chart and just hear what she has to say, and then I'm going to see if I can bring in some interpretations that embody everything that I just presented, and then we're going to open up the floor for discussion and questions, and the discussion can be, and the questions can be about anything I presented on, something you want to know more about, or actually kind of dissecting what's happened during the reading, asking me why'd you do that and not that. So yeah, let's do it. Okay. Oh, and I'm going to say one other thing, actually, is since most of us in this room are astrologers, practicing astrologers, or long students of astrology, I bet you are going to see all kinds of things that I do not see, and that happens in any reading. I'm just going to ask that you hold your comments until we're done with the reading, just so that we can honor the sacredness of the container. And that by all of us being focused on this, hopefully some things can come through. And then once we open it up, you'll feel free to make your comments and your contributions, hopefully within the container of the pharmacon. Is anyone sitting there? Well, Delia was.
I was.
How's that sound, Delia?
It sounds okay. Can you guys hear me?
No.
No?
I'm going to give you this.
Okay.
Can I switch places with you? I'm going to give you this microphone. No,
So this one doesn't work? No?
that one's for something else.
Okay.
So
Oh.
Delia has a very sweet and quiet voice, so we're going to give her the mic. And I'm going to take this to control things, this to see.
Static. Okay. Hear me now. All right.
All right. Thank you for doing this experiment with me.
You're so welcome. Thank
How
you
does
for
it
having
feel
me.
right now to have like all these people looking at us?
A little freaky.
Yeah, it is a little freaky, but they're nice freakies.
Yeah, they look like nice people.
Yeah.
Oh, I just can't talk very loud. How's that?
Can we hear her?
Can you hear me?
Let us know if you can.
Yeah, because I do tend to drop down kind of low. Thank you.
Thanks, Lene.
Pardon me. Oh, I'm just going to stick this much closer to
Okay.
your pretty hair side. Stick this way up here. All right, say,
Okay. Got me?
can we hear her?
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So I talked too much and I used some of our time. So we're gonna condense this to maybe we'll see how 10 minutes goes. If we need another 5, we'll do another 5.
Okay.
And then just as this is really your time and space to be able to talk about whatever you want to talk about, and I'll do my best to reflect what I see.
Well, one of the things I know about myself is that any anxiety usually makes my mind freeze up completely and go blank. So I'm going to try to stay connected. But so many of the things that you used as illustrations are operative in my chart: the Saturn-Pluto, the Uranus-Pluto. Okay, so what's happening for me right now is I feel like I'm in a place where I'm trying to move out of a position that I've been in for most of my life, which is feeling very identified with a lot of my own pain and suffering. I won't go into too many illustrations, but let's just say that I have an illustrious medical history. I get a lot of unusual stuff going on, and I have been, over the last couple of years, but particularly in the last several months, really dealing with, just so you guys know, I have scoliosis, which is a curvature of the spine, which typically isn't particularly painful, but I'm having some nerve problems at the moment, which are making my life really difficult. And I just had a surgical procedure to try to treat that, and it seems probably unsuccessful. But I have been having a lot of experiences lately where I feel like all of the things that I have been working for so long seem to be coming together, that my attempts to really shift my consciousness around this seem to be working, and there's been openings and lightness and a sense of kind of spiritual blessing of the experience that really is helping me, I pray, meet it with more grace. So I guess what I want to ask is, how can I bring myself to that? How can I put that work into practice so that I can feel my aliveness and take the blessings as well as the curses, instead of just focusing on what's hard and what's complicated and what's holding me back.
So I just want clarity on one thing that you said. You said, how can you take that and put it into, do you mean all the work that you've been doing, or?
I guess, how can I help keep myself open to the possibility that, I love the idea of pharmacon, that if I can use what I'm getting as medicine rather than as poison, I can potentially shift my vision around it so that I can have a different experience with the same basic data.
Right. I guess I would be curious on if you experience any of it as medicinal, or if it all feels like poison to you.
It's definitely medicinal. This is kind of what this life is about. It's about, learning how to be with what's there. And, it certainly had a lot of gifts. I am a psychotherapist, and I think going into my own experience of suffering inevitably helps me treat my clients, helps me feel compassion for all beings who suffer. It helps me know what people meet in this lifetime.
Yeah, it brings you into your deeper humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I guess there's 2 or 3 things that just pop out to me while you're talking, and one is about your natal chart, and then the other is about your transits.
Mm-hmm.
Just due in large part to the time. That's really tight, Saturn opposite Pluto that you're born with Uranus and Venus. I see essentially the whole spectrum and a lot of what I just talked about really coming through. And I think the fact that you have experienced extreme pain, which is common with the Saturn-Pluto, agony and the suffering, that from what I gather is that you've really been able to go very deeply into that suffering, and that you know the terrain very well, like you said, and that's partly of the service that you can bring to be a depth psychotherapist. But I hear this more kind of personal piece happening right now, where I hear how you've been able to bring your suffering to a collective level and bring it to the world and offer what you've learned and the wisdom that you've gathered through the suffering. But I hear more of like this personal piece coming through, which I really see with Saturn conjoining your moon. It'll go back to 4 Scorpio, an exact conjunction with your moon in July, and how it's an exact square to your sun right now. You're born with that sun square moon. And when Saturn aspects a certain part of the chart, partly what it's seeking is differentiation. And part of differentiation is unidentifying with what we've been identifying with while still maintaining our power. And oftentimes we have to become, or we have the experience of becoming powerless in that process, feeling that there's this inescapable thing which we can't seem to work through. The pain in your back, the surgery not working, there's this defeat, this sense of negation, the sense of being, you can't not feel pain, sorry.
Right.
I imagine.
There goes the hope.
There goes the hope, right. And there with Neptune, your moon Neptune, sun Neptune, there goes the hope, the disillusionment, which is common with Saturn Neptune, feeling that the dream or the ideal of Neptune is out of grasp. I obviously don't know the answer to, what you're dealing with, but just on an archetypal level, something that I've experienced with Saturn is that you have so many more years than I do. But there's something about just being with it and maintaining as much openness as you can to hear what is trying to come through. What is the medicine in this? Why is this happening? Even if you can't make rational sense of it on this day-to-day moment. Like you said, there's certain things that have come through in you. And I imagine, and it's hard for me not to comment more on on what you've said, because I have some understanding of more of what's going on in your life. But the intuitive sense that I get is that there's some kind of confrontation with the past that is probably happening through your familial line and family of origin that you're having to face, probably a lot of shadow material that hasn't been looked at. And there's something about it coming through, I'm guessing, your spine relating to Saturn that is helping to forge your identity in that square to the sun. I mean, you are sun, moon, rising. When you have the moon rising, there's a tendency to be very identified with the emotions, with the family, with the mother, right? It's on the ascendant, it's who you are from moment to moment. But then you have the sun in Leo at the midheaven, and the midheaven is more of the trajectory of our life and where we're going as we step into our creative potential. And as you know, Saturn brings its gifts with time, and Saturn transits tend to want to incarnate the aspect of our chart that it's touching. But first we have to go through a lot of grieving of whatever it's touching, because there's a loss, there's a letting go, there's a dying of the lunar dimension of relationships and of how you show up in the world and in your body. There's a dying that's happening there in order to fortify and crystallize and bring in whatever this kind of new sense of who you are is striving to be born to this time period. And I really feel that with the square to the sun. It's like it seems like your identity is striving to be forged in this way, but first there's this grief and this loss and having to actually confront the reality principle, which maybe you won't ever not be in pain, or maybe you will.
I mean, all that you're saying is right on. I think so much is happening in terms of, the lunar dimension, so much is happening in terms of my understanding of who I am and who I've taken myself to be in relation to my mother, my relation to my mother line, and to what I inherited from her and what I understand about the world and myself through her eyes, and how the work that I'm doing now, both physically and psychologically and spiritually, feels like it's helping me disidentify from all of that so completely. And does really forge more of a sense of my own identity. But it's important. I mean, I owe my life to my ancestors, and I carry them in my body. They're in my blood. So,
spoken like a true moon in Scorpio rising. Yeah, I feel that. I feel the grief present in that, honoring where you come from and honoring the past, the way Saturn asks us to, while simultaneously facing the hardship and the suffering. But I heard what you said, the disidentification with the mother, with the moon, and so that you can maybe feel more of who you are in a solar way instead of just being so identified with the lunar part of you, the body. That's
my plan, Yeah. I mean, to disidentify with that experience of being in this body that has all these issues. That there is, I feel like this period of time has, given me a lot of gifts. I mean, really profound gifts. So, I don't know how much time we have, so I don't know how much to say, but
probably a couple more minutes, 2 more minutes.
I feel like I'm being gifted with experiences that I have sort of always wished for in terms of my understanding of like how to participate with the cosmos in terms of understanding, like working with my beliefs and seeing how they structure the way that I see reality, and that it's really responding, and that I'm having this experience that I have always wanted to have, and I've always felt sort of limited and hindered, and that's, it's incredibly beautiful. So.
Oh, that's really beautiful. I'm really struck right then about how you simultaneously have Saturn squaring the sun, but you also have Uranus moving into a trine with the sun. And I hear you both visiting these beliefs, Saturn, these structures that kind of define you, and then simultaneously this orientation towards liberating the self and kind of rebirthing who you are and and your sense of self and your identity at the same time. You have really strong outer planet alignments to your sun right now.
It's true. It's kind of cool.
Well, thanks for trying this experiment with me.
Sure. My pleasure.
We'll try it again sometime in another
All right.
way.
All right, we will.
Thank you for just sharing what you're going through right now in front of so many people that you don't know.
Well, thanks for listening, you guys.
Mm-hmm.
Should I take off?
Yeah, sure.
All right.
Thanks, Delia.
Jess, thank you.
Okay. So let's try the Q&A now.
Oh.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, good point. Way to step into your sun and Leo right there in that moment.
Well, since you mentioned it several times, and I always do, because I have it in the 5th house,
Yeah.
as does Delia, I want to mention Chiron and a really powerful synchronicity I just realized, which is that it's at 21 Pisces in her natal chart. Obviously, exactly conjunct Mars in transit, as well
You
as
can put
your
it up
natal
there.
Mars.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So, yeah, her revealing significant and lifelong medical issues and Chiron's mythical relationship to the medical and wounded healing. Just found that to be, and her sort of, taking action around that and being in this confrontative space right now around it, which Mars would represent. Right. And its relationship to mother-daughter roles and her childhood. And I guess, just briefly, I would say it seems like with Saturn also being the karmic master, hard lessons through the medical, and in Pisces, the victim-savior complex, that it's connectively karmic in that there's a network of healing that happens through allowing herself to be in a position of victim or patient and other people stepping up into a role of compassion and that manifesting transformatively.
It's beautiful. I would turn to Delia and ask, how does that feel to you? Does that resonate? Or?
It does, absolutely. I mean, the last bit that you said, I would love for you to repeat.
Yeah, and it's interesting because Jess and I have this in common, Mercury, Neptune. I don't remember what I just said. I should be really responsible with that, but there's something that happens for me astrologically where, it feels like something's coming through me, and I try to sort of step aside / into it at the same time. But I think it was something along the lines of sort of a network effect, where you allowing yourself to be in a role that could be considered victim, or in this case, medical patient, it has this sort of reciprocal symbiotic karmic resolution. And in the 5th house relating to childhood, and you mentioned your mom, and then bringing in the collective through that Virgo stellium straddling the 10th, 11th. That's also 10th house, MCIC parental axis stuff, and those in a position of mastery or authority, sort of taking care of you in this role of child. Right? So yeah, something like that.
So are you saying that it's like a time period where these themes would be coming up for her to reevaluate or look at her relationship or her beliefs around it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the combination of, Saturn going over her moon in her 1st house, coming into incarnation, right? The 1st house, Neptune's there again, holographically coming into life as sort of in a weak, frail, role of needing help to be, in a body. And her Chiron return over that Saturn-Chiron conjunction, those roles maybe coming full circle and maybe the sort of resolution of that through, you know, the internalization of that care and being able to self-parent.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that coupled with the Saturn opposite Pluto in the natal chart, which can have a real tendency for feeling like you're at the mercy of these really large impersonal forces that essentially have nothing to do with you, you know, or that it's ancestral or it's karmic. It's just like there's not a lot of context this lifetime maybe for why you're experiencing what you're experiencing to the degree that you're experiencing it, and how that also that Saturn Pluto can really relate to the victim perpetrator dialectic and that dance between the two, and how do you move from being identified with one or the other, but the antidote to that, or the pharmacon in that, would be how do you embrace your authority and your power in a way where you're not feeling like a victim of the medical model or the family or the mother or the ancestry. But I really appreciated, what you had to say. Yeah.
I'm getting really excited about some things I'm seeing in there. First, I love that the moon is on your Mars, and somehow the subconscious got explored. And I'm super excited for you because I see you're going to be having a Jupiter conjunction. And I did hear you say that you felt like a breakthrough was almost coming. And then when Uranus is, you know, getting ready to enter that 6th house, to invite you to maybe prepare a little bit of a new regime, health regime, that, you know, to a quick shift of, you know, of how you prepare your daily routine. So I would like to say that.
Beautiful. Thank you.
How does that feel?
Yeah.
Great. Wonderful.
And I'm also a Leo with Scorpio rising.
Oh, wow.
With Saturn on the ascendant. So there's quite a few things that, you know, I feel.
You get, yeah. Thank you.
With your chart.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Well, I know nothing of psychology depth or otherwise, so would you please talk a little bit more about the disassociation with your present identity and Saturn, and then also maybe in contrast to recreating or reinventing yourself in a Uranian
Yeah,
sense?
great.
Or how would you,
Yeah, so with Saturn, I was saying the differentiation. So like when we're born, like essentially what Saturn does is it lets us know separation, right? From the moment we're born, we become a separate being from our mother, and that's when our birth chart is cast, when we become this autonomous being separate from her organism. We're still dependent upon her, but as we grow and the older we get, we become less and less dependent on our mother and then our family until we become more of who we are as appearingly separate, autonomous individuals. And that's the differentiation process where you're kind of first coming out of the womb, you're differentiating from the womb. Now you're no longer an aquatic being, but you're an air-breathing mammal. And then you get off the breast, or maybe you were never on it, but you get off the bottle. And then you know, you differentiate more and more. But emotionally and psychologically and spiritually, even though we're physically differentiated, we're still often very karmically tied to our parents, as we all know. Their problems are our problems, their joys are our joys, in some interesting way. So as adults, as we're kind of moving more from being so identified with the lunar dimension of the childhood experience, as we differentiate, we're stepping more and more into our solar potential, our own unique identity. And that differentiation process often happens when we get Saturn transits, because it makes us know loss, it makes us know separation, and it provides through that often solitude or isolation for us to get to know ourselves better, and step more into who we are by saying no to who our mother thinks we should be or our father thinks we should be, but really knowing who we are from the inside instead of knowing who we are from the outside. So it's about claiming our own authority instead of always having the authority be out there. That's what's happening when we're differentiating, and it often takes a lot of our life to do that because the ties are so deep, depending on your psychology with your parents. But then with the Uranus, and that's the pharmacon of it, is like it's separation and loss, but it's also incarnation. More of your soul incarnates through the Saturn transits because of the suffering that you go through, and the way that you respond to that suffering is what defines and builds your character. Even though it can be very, very painful, and there can be a lot of despair in it. The Uranus transit, with Uranus's tendency to liberate and bring rebirth and new experiences, but the trine to the sun is that there's this real nice confluent aspect of Delia getting support from the universe right now to have these new ways of expressing herself, like being vulnerable and coming up in front of the room and in front of all of these people and stepping more into her Leo sun, like here I am at the center of the room in front of all of you people. I would have never done that before. I would have just stayed hidden with the moon rising and been feeling everything I'm feeling and not really let any of you know what I'm feeling, because I'm just gonna hide it and suppress it and let it stay in the unconscious. So the Uranus coming in is like, hey, wake up to this part of you, try these new experiences, and these new experiences are what's going to lend itself for you to have this kind of new understanding of who your identity can be, and hopefully they're supportive and positive experiences to reinforce her to continue to do that. The universe seems to be good like that most of the time. Does that answer your question?
That helps a lot.
Okay.
Especially with Uranus moving, being in Aries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of fire,
Yes.
a lot of youthful energy.
Yes.
Initiation.
Thank you for that. More! Gentleman with his hand up.
I'm wondering about, for you as a counseling astrologer, when you are trying to help your client open to and see the shadow side of how their chart might be manifesting, and I guess just in general, do you have a strategy of how you help them open to that, and when you meet resistance or defense mechanisms, you have a strategy for working with those?
Yeah.
How much do you charge for that information?
Step into my office. Oh, here we are. Okay, that's a really good question.
Could you just repeat the question for
Oh, yeah.
for the recording?
Oh, yeah. Oh, boy. Shannon, Mercury, Neptune. Yeah, so when you're doing a reading for a client, how is it that you go about working with their shadow material and illuminating it for them, talking about it with them in a way that they hopefully can hear it? And what do you do when they have defense mechanisms against what you're saying, or they're just in complete denial about any possibility of that having anything to do with who they are? Right? Okay. Two-part question. I love this question. Okay. I think the very first thing is establishing a container of safety. And I think the way that you do that most basically is just by mirroring to the person. We know that we can only take someone as far as we've gone ourselves. To the extent that we've been through the fires, that's how far we can go with someone else. So how comfortable we are with our own pain and suffering, how comfortable we are with the great losses in our lives or the things that we feel deformed by, depending on how much we've sat with that and really felt into all of the emotions with that, that person's unconsciously going to be picking up that from us, and that gives them a cue on how much they can actually reveal to us and how safe it is to be revealing to us. So I think it's about creating a container of safety so that they feel safe to reveal the parts of themselves that they probably have shame around, if they have that level of capacity, that self-awareness to do so. So I think most importantly, we never want to shame someone for who they are, where they've come from, or where they're going. We never want to install fear into them, but rather a sense of openness to whatever it is they're facing in their life. Then I think you do it by first talking about, most people, it depends on the chart and the person's soul, but most people would like to hear positive things about themselves first. So going into the amazingness of who they are and their potential as a human being and why that's special. I mean, we all are narcissistic, so if you can make me feel special, I'm probably going to trust you a little bit more, because what's really happening there on a deeper level is you're providing a level of mirroring that I may have never received. I may have never been seen to the level you're seeing me by anyone in my life, maybe. And it's really interesting because on a personal level, you're seeing me in a way that really fundamentally we're all supposed to be seen by our parents, but our parents are human and they probably weren't seen, so they probably like can't see us totally. I mean, it's very natural, right? So we go to an astrologer, we go to a psychotherapist, and this person provides a level of mirroring, but the astrologer is providing a level of mirroring that's cosmic. So you're being seen by the cosmos, and there's something healing that provides in of itself. So if that person feels mirrored by you and by the cosmos, they're probably going to soften and just open up. I don't know why, but like a jellyfish. I don't even know if that makes sense, but that just came to mind. Anyways, maybe you evoke jellyfish in me. But anyways, and so they'll open up, and so we want to show them that they're loved, that they're special, and that they're cared for by the cosmos and by mirroring to them. And then that usually opens up the way to say, and a potential way this could come through, or something that sometimes these people, not you, want to be mindful of. People who have this combination, something they might want to be mindful of is it can relate to anger, violence. Oh yeah, you know, this one time. Something else that helps is that when you talk about how it's a field, it's a gestalt, so like, you might not be the embodiment of the anger, but you might be experiencing anger from other people in your life. So if you're a Moon-Mars person, you might not get angry, but maybe you elicit a lot of anger towards you. Oh yeah, man, my boss is always getting angry. My mom is always angry with me. So that's one way in, but not, so they don't have to be so close to it. You know, create a little distance for the person between them and the complex by talking about it over there, and then slowly bringing it in. And maybe they can identify with it, and if they can't, then they can't. No, they don't need to. And then we have our defense mechanisms for a reason. They protect us, they're there for a reason. And once our psyche's ready to hear whatever the reflection is, it'll soften up and hear that. But if you go into someone's defense mechanism, the things that you may be triggering inside of them, they might not have the capacity to deal with that, and it could be very traumatic for them. So it creates a real sensitivity to that person, and if it's too much for them, there's no reason to play with their defense mechanisms. But sometimes there's this really kind of trickstery way where you can come in and name the defense mechanism that's happening in the room. That's a holographic experience. So you see the defense mechanism, it's happening in the moment, and there's a way to name it and to talk about the archetype. Let's see, how could I illustrate that? I don't know if this is exactly it, but like when we do readings for people in their Saturn return, and the Saturn return is all about stepping into your own authority and differentiating from the parental structure and stepping into your autonomy. And then the person turns to you and says, well, what should I do with my life? Well, you're in the Saturn return. You tell me, what should you do with your life? And most of the time, if you ask someone what they deeply desire, they already know the answer. They're just maybe scared to say that they want to be this or they want to do this. So what's your deepest desire? What burns inside of your soul? What could you not, how, if you were, before you were to die, what is it that you would want to do? How could you not live with yourself if you didn't do X, And they'll tell you. So don't give in. Don't give in. Don't play into the complex that they're working through. Hold the space for them as space holders. Hold that space and don't fall into that complex, and just keep naming it. And more often than not, there's a breakthrough and an opening, and the person says, well, actually, does that answer your question? Other gentlemen.
Jessica, I wonder if you might say something about projection, particularly in the context of the paradoxical nature of the archetypes that you've been exploring, and in relation to how you, when you encounter someone else's chart, you as an astrologer also have a chart, right? So there's going to be a sense in which, once you've understood your own chart, you're better able to distinguish between when you're projecting on someone else's chart and when you're actually discovering an archetypal complex there.
Yeah.
So how do you work with negotiating the paradoxes of sort of the way that your own projections based on your archetypal complexes might limit your ability to see someone else's chart, but also the way that your chart enables you and gives you certain windows into someone else's chart. So the paradox of the light and shadow of projection, I guess.
Whew.
How do you explore that?
Yeah, wow, I love that topic. And I love how you waited for the last 2 minutes to ask it. So I'm just going to finish with this question and kind of do a little stream of consciousness. Thanks, Matt. I love that question.
I'm glad.
So how do we work with the paradox of the light and shadow of what's happening with projection? And how can we be aware of when we're doing a reading, if we're projecting or if we're actually having a real insight into this person's life? Well, isn't that the question of life? Whether we're projecting or whether we're actually seeing something as it is.
Can you define projection?
Yes. So projection is when there's something true about yourself that oftentimes you have a hard time seeing, that you then project out or place onto another person or some external experience. So for example, that person is really aggressive and mean, and I can't stand their anger. They're like, what? I'm not yelling, you are. That's projection. Like when you're angry, but you can't own it because it would be too painful for you to own that you're angry, and you say, that person's angry, and that person's not yelling. That's an example of projection. You want to add anything to it? Okay. So we all project all the time. It's a very natural thing. It's a very healthy thing, actually. That's the paradox of projection. The paradox is medicinal and poisonous. It's a pharmacon, like every phenomenon. So part of the awesome part of projection is we project things that are true about ourselves outside of ourselves to have the mirroring to be able to actually see back who we are. And that's where we project amazing things that we have about ourselves, amazing qualities that we love, and obviously, and often jealousy is tied up, like, God, why is that person such an amazing artist? I'm so jealous of them. It might be an indication that you're an amazing artist and you haven't owned it and you're projecting onto them. Anyways, this is another story. So projection can be really healthy, right? Because that's how we get to know ourselves. We project God outside of ourselves. He or she lives in the sky. It's so awesome. It gives us something to move towards. We feel mirrored. We feel seen. We're in this relationship that's outside of ourselves and external. So we're growing towards something. And it can be really poisonous because it can cloud our vision, and so we're never actually seeing anything as it is. We're just seeing it as this projection of who we are. It's kind of narcissistic. Like, I am only going to see you to the extent that I can see myself in you, instead of being in a real I-thou relationship with you. So it can be poisonous. So it's very paradoxical in that way, and there's light and shadow in it. So when you're doing a reading, that's where really having done as much inner work as you can, as being as authentic and real with yourself as you possibly can to know who you are as a person, to know your biases, to know your fears and your wishes. That's a great place to go. What are your deepest fears and what are your deepest wishes? And then be listening for them coming out while you're talking to somebody. I mean, it takes a certain level of being open and reflexive about who you are. And also being really open to hearing reflections. And I think the best way to do it in a reading is to see how the reading is sitting with the other person. If it's resonating for them and it's connecting something in their soul and it's opening something up, then you're probably not projecting. If it's not working for them and they have no idea what you're talking about and they think you're crazy, then it's probably a projection. Or just a total, like, you're reading the wrong person. You're like, oh wait, that was my next client. Yeah. So we're at time. I want to say more to that, but next time.
All right.
Now we're all friends. So hey, thank you so much. I really appreciate your presence.
Outstanding job.
Thank you so much.
Great job. Really, really well prepared and excellently delivered. Very, very nice delivery. So thank you so much.
Thank you
very
so much.
Good job. Thanks.
Thank you.
Say bye.
Bye. Blessings.
Okay. Well, I thought that was really good. I was very rapt listening, to this discussion with features that I have in my chart and other family members, and that have been really, really present for me. So I hope that other people, in fact, I imagine that many people in the audience identified with a lot of what you were discussing. So very good.
Good,
Very
I'm
well,
glad.
Very nice job. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you
Let's
so
give her a
much.
round of applause.